Judy Allahan Willis. I was there from the start. I was a scholarship kid from Queens, New York. And my father sold hot dogs in the underground subway way below Grand Central Station. I wound up at Vassar College. And when I was there, an opportunity came up to create my own major. And sophomore year, I was elected vice president of student government. These gave me connections to one of the deans who invited me into his office with an incredible offer. It was the fall of 1968, and he asked if I might recruit some friends for an experiment in coeducation. It was going to be a one semester only with a Vassar to Williams exchange. I signed on and I stayed on through that beginning and some challenges of threatening a topless sit-in so they'd let some of us graduate. Through that initial exchange, Vassar and Williams, 2 other colleges signed on. It became a 10-college exchange, and you know the rest.
Here we are in the Williams College Cemetery as a way of introducing you all to some of the heroes of the coeducation story. John Bascom, professor of rhetoric, and his wife and daughter. Coeducation was first proposed at Williams in 1869. The advocate was John Bascom, who was married to a pioneering suffragist. But his proposal was defeated in 1871 by a 3-2 vote. Women simply were not ready for a place like Williams, the majority declared. They must not have known the Bascoms' young daughter, Florence. She got her first 2 degrees from the University of Wisconsin after her father was named its president. Then she became the first female PhD student at Johns Hopkins, though she was made to attend classes behind a screen lest she distract the men. I won't detail her groundbreaking career as a geologist, but today an asteroid is named for her, as is a crater on Venus and a lake here in Berkshire County. In her last years, Florence Bascom returned to the Purple Valley and was known to sit in on classes in the 1940s.
This is my father, Fred Rudolph, a legendary professor, college historian, and Williams graduate himself in 1942. In his oral history, he recalled how students back then might see this old woman in lecture halls, occasionally asking questions or daring even to offer a comment.
The young Williams men likely had no idea who that gray-haired lady was in the back of the room, or that her daddy had urged the school to accept the likes of her 70 years earlier.
My father had the quintessential suburban commuting experience, and he would make it a point to come back from his job in time for the cocktail hour and dinner with the family every night. And my mother, she loved poetry. She read us poetry when we were 2 and 3 years old. My high school boyfriend was kind of a 60s radical and was heading off to Columbia and Students for a Democratic Society. Actually, it was interesting. He took me to my first concert, which was to see James Brown at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. I think my parents never knew that's where I was. They would have been scared. And he said, "Why are you going to Vassar? Why are you going up to Poughkeepsie with all those virgins?"
I came from a big public high school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My father had put himself through Carnegie Tech on a football scholarship. My high school boyfriend was at Williams as a freshman when I was a senior in high school, and he invited me to homecoming and then to Winter Carnival. And I fell in love with the campus. I just loved it. And so when my parents took me to New England for a college tour, I had them stop and walk around the Williams campus. I wanted to go into the office and, see if I could apply to Williams, but I knew I would be laughed out the door. And I ended up applying to Smith Early Decision, thinking that it would somehow be like Williams.
My dad knew about Mount Holyoke. At this point, I could not tell you why or where, but he always felt it was a terrific school. He loved it. He very much wanted me to go there, and he actually thought when I transferred to Williams that I was going down in the world. He thought I should have stayed put.
When I was attending Smith and Williams, it was a transitional time for women in society. When I first went to Smith, many of the women were pursuing their MRS degree, following the pattern of getting pinned junior year, engaged senior year, married right after graduation.
When I arrived on the Vassar campus in my little villager dress and, was all prim and proper, we had a convocation as we did every fall. Alan Simpson was the most proper British president of the college, and he spoke about what would happen to those of us who were so privileged in many ways, was to obtain this Vassar education and prepare ourselves to be the wives of great men.
Coeducation was never going to happen during the long presidency of James Finney Baxter. "Not on my watch," he said. Here we are at the plot of Jack and Ann Sawyer. Jack, a rather conventional upbringing and background before coming to Williams, and then who would have thought that under his presidency that the college would make such significant changes in its curriculum, in the abolition of fraternities, and of course in the introduction of women as degree candidates at Williams College. John Sawyer floated the idea of bringing in women at his second faculty meeting as president. His first thought was to create a coordinate women's college at Mount Hope Farm or at Denison Park near the base of Spring Street. My understanding is that several people, including the president, used a secret code name for this discussion about coordinate education, as the institution would be referred to as Williams and Mary. Wink, wink. Then he had a better idea.
I did not go to Williams for better academics. In fact, if anything, at Holyoke, the grading was harder and there were a lot of demands, and it was a very good school academically. I think what I didn't like so much was the sort of the weekend scene.
The opportunity to meet people was a single mixer on Friday evening where the guys are bussed in. We went into the dance floor auditorium, and based on a random selection to dance with somebody, the next thing that would happen would be you are or are not invited to spend the weekend with them, the winter weekend or the winter carnival at Williams or Amherst or Yale. And that was it, a short time relationship. Now you have 2.5 days together. Not really cool.
Well, I think I applied to go to Williams because I didn't know anybody at Williams, and I had reasons to avoid some people at some of the other schools.
After about 2 months at Smith, and I was writing home and calling home, lamenting the fact that there were no men on campus and there were no men to date, and oh, poor me. And I got this very stern letter from my father saying that he and my mother had not sent me to Smith to meet a husband, and they had sent me there to get a good education and a damned good education. And I better settle down and focus on my studies. And so when the opportunity to apply for the exchange came up, I did that.
When I got to Vassar, I was not prepared for the social life. And this idea that you get on buses to go to mixers was so foreign to me. And my mother was like, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to leave Vassar? Everybody knows the name Vassar. Well, so my parents gamely drove me up to Williamstown, and we get up to that main drag. And there, what seems to be and probably were hundreds of young men swarming all over the campus, crossing the main drag, and not a single young woman to be seen. And I was sitting in the back seat, and I said to my parents, what have I done?
The first exchange was in the spring of 1969, when 30 Vassar students came here on exchange. The following year, the 11 college exchange was developed. It became the 12 college exchange with the addition of Wellesley. The exchange program was not a one-way opportunity. There were Williams men who were going elsewhere, including to Vassar, and some never came back.
I was a psych major at Smith, but I decided not to take any psych classes at Williams. I wanted to take some different courses some of which I was afraid to take at Smith, and I thought I would give them a try at Williams. And so I took symphony, American religion, American architecture, and Russian lit. And I noticed in 3 out of the 4 of these classes, this one young man, Steve Brown, and found out that the reason he wasn't in my 4th class was because he had taken it the semester before. And he very kindly offered to guide me through that 4th class.
I signed up for a religion class. I cannot, for the life of me, remember the name of the class, but it was taught by Conrad van Auwerkerk, who, as people will remember, was a former Jesuit priest from the Netherlands, and a brilliant man and a lovely man. And whatever was the title or the official syllabus of the class, I think there were 4 or 5 of us who would go to his house a couple of times a week, sit around his kitchen, eat Dutch cookies, and ponder the meaning of life.
I had to design and build my dream house for American architecture, and Steve helped me with that too.
My first class with Clay Hunt was a poetry class, and I wrote a paper, and he gave me a C on it, which I was really taken aback by. And he said on it, don't just write all of these words. Tell me what's actually going on in the poem. And after that, I took every course he offered. I believe the poem was Yeats' poem, Among School Children, which is about a 60-year-old smiling public man, that is Yeats, coming back to a school and walking among the school children. And I distinctly remember reading that poem at the time and thinking, wow, 60, that's a long way down the road. He described himself as an old scarecrow, and he was walking among the children, and it made him think back about this woman that he loved so deeply and what she had looked like as a child.
Oh, body swayed to music, oh, brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance?
We were really very fortunate, the Vassar women who came to Williams, because Williams was nervous and they wanted to do everything possible for us. So we got into whatever class we wanted. Because I was an English major at Vassar, taking lots of English there, I was not going to take English at Williams. Mr. Godino's class was, not surprisingly, in his house. He showed films. I was exposed to 400 Blows by Truffaut. It was just a whole different dialogue, and certainly very different from the traditional classroom. And then there was Mr. Bastard. That class was like out of a movie, and it was like out of Paper Chase. He had an incredible sixth sense, I guess it was, about who was prepared and who wasn't prepared. And I saw these guys who seemed to be almost grown men literally shake when he would call on them, and they would stand and he would just grill them. And he was merciless. And it was as though if you said that the sky was blue, he would be, "Are you sure? Are you sure there's no black in that sky?" And then he would get you to say the sky was black. And he would say, "No, you just told me the sky was blue." I spent almost all my time in that classroom petrified. I kind of gathered that he wouldn't call on me unless I raised my hand. For one very specific class, I overprepared and I raised my hand and he called on me and he grilled me just a little. I mean, not nearly like what he did to the guys. At the end of the semester, there was a ritual that all the members of the class stood, applauded the professor, and then left in single file, shaking the professor's hand as you left the classroom. So when I followed suit and it came my turn to shake Professor Brostert's hand, he said, "Wait a second." And he ran to his desk and got out a box of Kleenex and gave them to me. And when I looked at him like, "What is this?" He said, "When they told me you enrolled in my class, I didn't really know what to do. I had never been in a classroom with a woman. I'd gone to all boys schools, I'd gone to prep schools, and all I could think to do was to buy you a box of tissues, but you didn't need them, so here they are."
Clay Hunt had a reputation for being somewhat crude, but he was always a complete gentleman with me. And he used to invite students out to what he called his country place at the Hopper. And one time his sister was there and they cooked up this amazing Southern feast. After Williams, I had a Watson Fellowship and was traveling in Italy. And this professor who had given me a C ended up coming over during spring break with another student. And we traveled around Sicily. A few years later, Clay came to my wedding, as did Binks Little and Bob Giardino and Larry Graver, and just realizing how special that is and who has that experience.
Not only was there a change in the social scene, but I fell in love. Although it wasn't with a classmate initially, it was with an electron microscope. I was a biology major, and my professor had received two, not just one, two electron microscopes. One was better. Anyway, he offered up to a student the use of the other electron microscope and taught me how to use it and gave me the opportunity to do research on it. Oh man, could you imagine? I'm in this room and I'm looking deep into the cortex of baby chicks. But not only was it what I got to do with the electron microscope, but where I got to do it. Brofman was the one and only building I ever fell in love with. It was, to me, that double helix, that staircase. I still love it in memory. And it was a place where I could even bring my dog. Remember at Williams, houses could have dogs? That's where I could bring my dog, go to my electron microscope, do the research that was the foundation of the rest of my career. And that's how and why I needed to stay another year at Williams.
This is Goodrich House, which was one of the residences for women in the early days of coeducation.
We were there early for orientation, as I remember. And one night there was this loud, raucous, drunken male voices outside of the annex, and they began to pound on the windows and rattle the door, which fortunately we had locked. And so we called campus security. And in my memory, it took them at least 35, felt like 45 minutes to come. But the campus security did catch the tail end of them. As it turned out, they were not Williams students, they were townies.
Yes, they banged on the doors. especially that first year in Lambert House, which was very easily accessible to anybody. They thought they were very, I don't know, suave, desirable, something. They were kind of annoying.
Coach Navarro's house. He had, with the football coach, he had just left, and he had a whole slew of kids. So he had a house with lots of bedrooms, and my roommate and I were in some little boy's room that had, trains, planes, and automobiles. It looked like a Richard Scarry book on the wall.
Weren't the old professors still swimming in the nude in the pool, I think, sometimes during the week, if I remember correctly? At this point, it's hard to remember what was actual and what was apocryphal, but I know that was at least apocryphal, so there was limitations on when we could go swimming.
It was clear to the president that the leadership of the Department of Athletics needed change.
The then director of athletics felt that there should be a sign up on some of the athletics facilities which said that they were for use by Williams students and co-eds. Enough said about that.
Well, I was a psych major, so I had to take psychology. In the winter of 1970, I was on campus for winter study, and I was spending a lot of time with the Park family because I was interested in studying autism. I was really learning up close and personal what it was like for the family to live with a child with autism. During that month of January, I came down with pneumonia, and I went to the Williams Health Center. And there was a male doctor there who feigned listening to my chest by keeping the stethoscope about 5 or 6 inches away from my chest. So I grabbed the stethoscope and put it on my chest so he could hear what was going on. And I ended up in the infirmary with a high fever and a terrible cough, and I was really sick. I fainted, and they scraped me off the floor and put me back in bed. And I'm lying there, and this battle axe of a nurse came in, and she said to me, "Listen, young lady, I don't want any funny business going on in this hall." And I said, "Funny business?" And she said, "Yeah, there are boys down the hall here."
They said, "We won't be graduating any of you. Go back home. We're only going to start giving graduation diplomas from Williams to students in 72. Well, that wasn't going to work for me. And clearly it wasn't going to work for many of the other exchange students. So I took the message I learned when I was writing for the Williams Record about protests, including the protests that we had on the steps of Chapin. So sit-ins, okay? So I invited the other women of Williams who wanted to stay to strategize, and suggested that we threaten a topless sit-in on the steps of Chapin or Hopkins. Indeed, we didn't have to do it, but perhaps based on the threat that I leaked, they said, "We will take 5 of you, but we won't tell you what we're going to use as criteria."
I guess 19 or 20 of the women who were on campus applied, and 5 of us were accepted initially, and then 2 more were accepted. And I think this is correct. Basically what they did, well, it was a full sort of application process. I think they just took the women with the highest grades of that semester, because Williams, being Williams, figured anything that wasn't a Williams grade, who cared?
My mother remembered that I would sit at the window and wait for the postman to come every day over Christmas break to hear whether I was actually admitted.
Over Christmas break, the notices came out, and it was via a special delivery letter to my house. And I think that was the first and maybe the last special delivery letter I ever got. And it was very exciting. One picture with the 5 of us on a staircase It must have been, I guess, before the other two women were admitted, which wasn't very long after. You can sort of look at the style of the time from the top of the steps with Jane Gardner and her pearls, down to the bottom of steps with Joan Hertzberg with her very long flowing hair and her poncho, and everybody else sort of arrayed in between. So it was a good image of the times and showing the range of all of us. We were not cookie cutters.
On that picture on the stairway, we were ranged from perhaps the most out there to the most conventional, and I was up on the top wearing my pearls. And yeah, I probably was the most conventional. And I think that was something that in the end maybe opened some opportunities for me. And that was the year I house sat for the president with Kit Sawyer. And I was occupying the room that Lady Bird Johnson had stayed in when she came to help dedicate the Environmental Studies Center, which set off a round of protests and was quite the event.
It was a time of great political awakening for me. And so I got involved with draft resistance counseling. And I remember telling one of my friends who was sure that he was going to be able to avoid the draft and thus avoid Vietnam, because he had lost the tip of his middle finger in a firecracker accident. I remember having to say to him, no, that won't do. It's got to be either two knuckles on different fingers or a thumb to get you out of the draft.
We know something about student attitudes toward coeducation in those early years, thanks to a survey Ellen Josephson conducted in the winter of 1970 to 71. She asked men and women on campus what criteria should be used in selecting co-eds.
Both the male and female respondents apparently agreed on the first two criteria, which should be creativity and the potential of the candidate to contribute to the campus community. But there was an interesting divergence on the third category. Women, sensibly, I would add, thought that it should be grades. Men, on the other hand, thought that it should be the attractiveness of the female candidate.
That social life at Williams that I thought would be so comfortable and realistic rather than that ship in by busing Friday night thing. Well, it surprised me, but there was not a whole bunch of guys who invited me to do things with them or date them. They were still going on road trips. The seven of us were oddities or went on the exchange. I guess we were oddities. Maybe they were shy, maybe it was us, but it didn't quite happen that way. The friends I got were things like by playing squash. And I didn't know how to play squash, but a friend, Rocco, said, I'll teach you how to play squash. I said, I'm a little nervous, but he taught me. Then I became hooked. And I kept trying to find partners to play all the time with me. Finally, another friend, Michael, said, oh, Judy, come on, how about ask that guy over there? Maybe he'll play with you. So I went and asked that guy, turned out to be Paul Willis, and we played squash. And he was the first person who, after our game, and I was good by then, didn't say, hey, let's go have a soda at the snack bar. He just said, will you leave your ball here? Because I want to keep playing. Well, that was pretty curious, and I had to end up marrying him.
Jack Sawyer once confided the qualities necessary to make change at a tradition-bound institution like Williams is, quote, a combination of high principle and low cunning.
In the fall of 1970, I was asked to go to different alumni clubs in New England to talk about coeducation. I think it was because some of these older alums were not very happy about the fact that we were being admitted to walk across the graduation stage. I always thought that I was asked, and I assumed that some of the other women were asked to speak to these groups to show that we weren't ditzy, empty-headed young things, nor were we militant bra burners.
When I was going around to alumni clubs, I never met a really aggressive or rude alum. Most of the alums who had any regret were rueful rather than angry at the college. And I can remember conversations with a number of alums who would start out by saying, well, I guess the college had to get rid of fraternities, and I guess the college really had to go coeducation. And then it was like light bulb went off in their head, and they'd say, and that really means that Sally can go to Williams. And it was such a pleasure for them to anticipate that their daughters, their granddaughters, their next door neighbors could come to the college that they were so fond of. If anyone doubts how wisely the college selected its first women graduates, just look at what they did in their lives beyond college.
Well, I was never a risk taker, and I would typically do the conventional thing first and then say, actually, this isn't making me very happy. And that was my experience with Vassar. And then it was also my experience when I went to law school. So I dropped out of law school and then later on regrouped and went to Stanford Business School and then started a career in advertising. There were a lot of opportunities, and one of them was a little company up in Seattle that was based opposite Pike's Fish Market, and there were only 20 people in it. And I heard about it from a friend, and I went to my management and said, I want to go pitch that little company. My parents were coming for Easter weekend, and we had to prepare for the pitch over the weekend. So they came and watched my daughter, and I spent the entire weekend in the office. And on Monday morning, we flew up and pitched the account. And so I did. I pitched against 6 other ad agencies, and I won the account. This was pre-IPO, and I worked closely with them for the next 3 years. And guess what? It's no longer a little company of 20 people.
Those of us who were second semester juniors, we knew that we would be completing our senior year at Vassar. Yeah, Williams was amazingly great at fundraising. And so I kept up that way as well.
I applied to transfer to Williams, but was told I couldn't transfer because they had already accepted the 7 women that they wanted to have in the class of 71. 50 years later, I am an honorary member of the class of 1971. I am married to a Williams grad, class of 71. I am the mother and mother-in-law of Williams grads, class of 04. I have a house in Williamstown. I love to paint now. I've taken that up since my children graduated from college. And my favorite subject to paint, cows.
They asked us to pose for a picture. Well, my quote background as a high school cheerleader led me to think, hey, instead of just standing here for a picture, why don't we make a pyramid? I love that picture. The only copy I have of the pyramid shows 5 of us with a fairly flat top. It's possible that someone else is there. And in the photograph I have for the past 50 years, they were chopped off. But I embrace the copy that I have with space at the top because we were aware that there'd be people to follow. And that space was in our hearts and in our hopes to be the place where future women at Williams would be at the pinnacle. And I was so grateful that ultimately my daughter became a future Williams student.
My daughter went to Williams and she was class of 2006. And I can, when I went with her, and not only just, walking around campus and, God, all these women, this looks just very odd. It just didn't even dawn on anybody to think about. She knew, told her friends that I was one of the first couple of women to graduate, but it was all ancient history at that point, which honestly is exactly what it should have been.
I did one of my graduate programs at the University of Michigan, and I went to 2 football games at U of M, huge stadium, legendary marching band. I much preferred the Williams marching band with its crazy hats and crazy formations, if you could call them that. The crazy football games. Sometimes a dog walked onto the field, sometimes it was an escaped faculty kid, and the game would stop. I loved the Purple Mountains. All of that stays with me to this day.
When Maud Mandel was named the first female president of Williams, I thought that was incredibly exciting. And they invited some of the former trustees to attend her induction ceremony. And I was sitting there in Chapin Hall at this ceremony. And in her speech, she said,
"As you know, Williams is celebrating 50 years of coeducation."
And she said, there are women in the audience who were part of the first class to graduate from Williams. And she said that she was proud to be a pioneer in that role. And I was proud that I was able to be a pioneer in my role. And it was this full circle experience. I was wearing pearls, as I am today. They're kind of my trademark.
The mountains, we greet them.